Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Benesh-Liu, and I'm one of the two co-editors of Ornament magazine. I want to make clear that I am a new co-editor because my mother, along with my father, Robert K. Liu, were the founding co-editors in 1974. And she passed away in late 2020 from stage 4 breast cancer. And that has been a very big impact on our heart. Um, Really, it's only because the people in this community are so loving, so wonderful, so sensitive to the world that we've been able to keep our way. So thank you. And I also want to thank SNAG uh, from Brian Rosner, the wonderful executive director who keeps this whole thing from spinning apart. And the other, Carrie Ann Quick and Seth Pepich, did I say that right? But thank you very much for hosting and making this just a very human event and so joyous. Tara Jecklin. I also want to say thank you to you because I know that you're always running things behind the wheels, so thank you. And too many more to count. I'm basically introducing some of the award participants in a way. And my short talk is about unsung milestones. Because while we're recognizing Mary Lee Hu, Susie Ganch, and Arthur Hash for their contributions to the community and the field this year, I think the truth is that there are many people here, and not only in the metalsmithing part of the craft field, but on the fullness of it, that deserve recognition every day for the contributions they make to creativity and to life. And so I'm going to do a few of those here in a way that I think also addresses our own anniversary and milestone, our 50th year. I think rather than telling you about what Ornament is, I want to directly show you and also give a little bit of credit to my mother in the process. For Mary Lee Hu, my mother, who was a big fan, wrote an article, and I know you all like process, so who chooses 18 karat gold for stiffness and 22 karat gold for rich color and flexibility? Additionally, 24 gauge wire in 18 karat gold is used for the warp entwining and 30 gauge 22 karat gold for the weft. For framing, the wires are all 18 karat gold. With 3 different types of gold, that is it. Not much variety, but the result is something else entirely. Her works vibrate with inherent energy, fresh and spontaneous. Even though conceived with much deliberation, they are unfailingly, intuitively correct. There is no false note to discern and quibble over. How lucky to have found a perfect fit between medium, technique, and material. I need to skip forward a little bit here. This is some photographs from my mother's visit to the 2014 SNAG conference in Minneapolis. The year after, she sent me to my first SNAG conference in Boston, and I've been hooked ever since. Yes, let's have it up for Susie Ganch. Of Susie Ganch, writer Glenn R. Brown writes, "The path from routine perception to the insight characteristic of innovative art tends to be followed intuitively and, in the best of circumstances, to culminate in epiphany, a sudden realization that one's sense of the ordinary has changed, and that consequently, the possibility of revising perspectives on some aspect of experience has opened like a gate to another dimension. For the artist, such realization fuels creativity, but just as important, it can provide clear direction and purpose to an activity that might otherwise seem as tentative as a sleepwalker's groping. At the very least, it stimulates further thought and can be a source of new enthusiasm in the studio. At its most productive, it gives rise not only to the work and the series, but also to an entire conceptual framework within which to justify art as an endeavor. For Susie Ganch, one such moment of realization came a decade ago while on her way to work in San Francisco, where she taught at Academy of Art University until joining the faculty in the Department of Craft and Material Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University in 2005. Commuting on her familiar route spawned the kind of desultory thought that drifts so easily through the medium of the mundane. I was wondering what it would be like to drive to work if I were an electron, she remembers. Would I just go right through things because I was so small that I couldn't be blocked? I thought if I were an electron and I could move through the car, then where would I end and the car begin? And where would the car end and I begin? That made me start thinking about the sameness of everything. We're really all the same stuff. And if you take that idea further, the whole universe is just stuff, interconnected stuff. We're all in a system on a large scale, a huge ecosystem. Arthur Hash, we have not written an article about, but now having been introduced to him, I can see a lot of wonderful attributes to his career thus far. Hash has really delved into modern technologies of 3D printing, CAD, CNC, rapid prototyping, laser engraving, and water jet cutting. But the real reason he was nominated for the Impact Award is because he shares everything that he's experimented on with the community, and he engages with it on social media. Susie Ganch, just to provide a little bit of context, she is responsible for Radical Jewelry Makeover, which has been a project trying to find ways of having responsible, sustainable, environmentally friendly sources for jewelry materials. In both of these endeavors, Susie and Arthur are finding ways to address the obstacles that are holding our community back from our best selves. So thank you to both of them. A few people I'm just going to give some brief shout outs to. Bob Ebendorf, part of the founding of SNAG, and he has been a big part of holding us all up and getting new people into exhibits, and thank you to Bob. Now I'm going into a few of the people that some of you may know, some of you may not, and many of these are just studio artists. Kathleen Dustin has been a member of the polymer field and really has pushed the boundaries of the medium. My mother wrote, Dustin has found a place that many would envy. She relishes that her art is stimulating and rewarding, that it has pushed her to grow in understanding and knowledge, that it has positively impacted other facets of her life. She is feeling the stretch and the gain of self-potential and power. Her story is not only that of an internal odyssey, but one that has taken her to many parts of the physical world. She has lived throughout the United States in Michigan, Arizona, Virginia, and now resides in Houston, Texas. Currently now she's in New Hampshire. She also has lived in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Each location has helped shape her artistic nature, bringing it to the specific qualities of its time, place, and culture. Wherever she worked over the last 20 years, the singular, resonant theme of female identity gradually and with an increasingly assured structure emerged in her artwork. The womanly form and the female sensibility became the subjects of fascination and veneration for Dustin's portrayal. This article was written in 1997. Here's some of Dustin's pieces throughout the ages. But what Dustin has done in recent years, she's recently left the craft show circuit. She's now working with a nonprofit called Samonat, which is in Nepal. We wrote about this in our Stacey Lee Weber issue about a year ago. And Samonot is an organization for women who are in difficult domestic situations. And the purpose of it is to give them both shelter and to teach them skills to be able to make a living for themselves. It was the brainchild of an Australian polymer artist and lawyer, and a Nepalese lawyer. And the Australian woman found Dustin's work and asked her, "Can you teach these women how to make these beads?" And this was during COVID, in the midst of COVID, and Dustin agreed. And so in 2021, she started setting up these Zoom sessions, three-way between Nepal and the US and Australia. And she rapidly found that these women were very skilled. Had some innate talent. And they loved having these new levels of expression. One thing you will find in the article is some of the cultural differences between Paul and here. And I encourage you to do so, because what I'm telling you in these little excerpts are just the tip of an iceberg. Joyce Scott, I want to recognize because she's had a number of exhibitions kicked off last year by Mobili Gallery, and now she's having a big retrospective at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And Joyce, if you don't know Joyce, I mean, she is such distilled charisma that it's dangerous to be around. She is just going to wind you around her finger and make you feel like everything's okay. And man, there's some magic going on right now. And that's what's just one of the things that's really great about her. But I want to read a short excerpt from Karen Surley's article. Back in 1992, primary influences on Scott's beadwork are African, particularly Yoruba beadwork, African American, and Native American. But really, I have a worldview. There are references from everywhere: Asia, Europe, and America. If we are going to work things out, we have to work together. Wry, ready, incisive words roll off Scott's tongue like the images in her necklaces. A gifted improvisational actress, she approaches her beadwork similarly. She may start with an idea for a shape or a theme, then improvises freely, allowing the messages to emerge from the beads themselves, enjoying the process. The three-dimensional figures are hollow tubes constructed entirely of beads and thread. Other layers in the piece can be seen through them. Use of differently colored threads subtly changes the bead coloring. Using the peyote stitch, she can easily control the amount of rigidity and/or flexibility of the beaded structures. Looks like I have to wrap it up. So there's a few other artists in both the California area and otherwise that I do want to recognize. Marion Hunter has been working for 56 years as an enamel artist. Her husband, William Hunter, is a wood artist who has made very graceful, wonderful pieces. And our cover feature on the left and one of her more recent pieces on the right. Mary Hicklin and Alex Zabados are also some dear friends who have been in the field for a long time, and you know how hard it is out there. So Bruce Pepich is getting to his 50th year of running the Racine Art Museum. So yay for that. And Carol Sauvignon, since you're in California, she runs Craft in America, which some of you might know of, some of you might not, but it is the only real attempt to put our field into mainstream media. And it is done by someone who is a ceramicist herself as well as a gallerist. So she does understand all this. And she does not get enough recognition. These are some other people in our field who have retired from the craft show circuit, but they're very beloved. My late mother, myself, and my father. So Judith Kinghorn, Ken Lober and Donna Look, Roberta and David Williamson, Steve Ford and David Filano, we miss you. Just had to do this because my mom went to Carter Smith workshop with my father, and this shirt is from the workshop. And that's me on the left. Thank you, and please give it up for Mary-Lee Hu, Susie Ganch, and Arthur Hatch.
Good afternoon. I'm Don Friedlich. I'm a former SNAG president and currently a member of the SNAG's Lifetime Achievement Award Committee. Along with our chair, Emily Storer, curator at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and Devere Tarragon, freelance curator from Michigan. Before I forget, I want to thank Emily. She's been on this committee for 3 years and is just finishing her term, and she's been an absolute joy to work with. So the three of us were charged with selecting the recipient of SNAG's highest honor. Many of you have been on a committee of some sort for conferences, searches, board positions, even 6 SNAG members trying to decide where to go for dinner. Always difficult. And you know that differing opinions can happen and they can even be contentious. Fortunately, this was not one of those situations. Each of us independently reviewed a very strong pool of nominations, having agreed to pick our top 3 candidates. We then had a Zoom call and all 3 of us had Mary-Lee Hu as our first choice. So it really couldn't have been much easier. If I went through her whole CV, we'd be here through dinner and you would likely get cross. But a few career highlights include 3 National Endowment for the Arts fellowships, having our work shown in museums and galleries all over the world and in the permanent collections of the Smithsonian's Renwick Gallery, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and many others. A dedicated educator, she's a professor emeritus at the University of Washington, where she taught for 26 years. She was among the earliest members of SNAG, having attended the very first SNAG conference in Minneapolis, and served a term as the 3rd SNAG president. She's also been intimately involved with the National Ornamental Metals Museum in Memphis and the UMA Symposium, among many other things. I feel the word master may be the most overused term in our field, but it certainly applies to Mary. For decades, I've been in awe of the masterful jewelry she creates. One doesn't reach Mary's level of accomplishment and excellence as an artist, educator, and leader by bumbling through life like Forrest Gump. While serendipity can occasionally play a part, it takes patience, persistence, discipline, professionalism, generosity, vision, leadership, creativity, skill, and a lot of hard work sustained over 6 decades. The world is changed by the activists, those like Mary, that take the time to be involved, to do the work. As is often the case with art, science, and other fields, narrowing one's focus can bring greater depth to the exploration. That's certainly the case with Mary's choice to focus on wire. She consciously took the path less followed to find fertile ground, well aware that few others made this choice. It's often true that fresh territory can be found in the cusp between 2 mediums, in her case, bringing textile techniques to goldsmithing. I know in my own work, when I have an idea I think I can run with for a while, I say it has legs. In Mary's exploration of wire, she's found a veritable centipede and produced an extraordinary body of work. Young-Chut the winner of our 2022 design competition to make the new SNAG Lifetime Achievement Award, has created an elegant composition titled Memory of Objects, which will be shortly presented to Mary. She's a SNAG member who lives and works in Seoul, Korea. Mary's nomination was made by her former grad student, Phil Renato, professor and chair of product design at Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Phil wrote a beautiful letter of nomination, but I suspect if it simply said, "It's Mary," duh, that would have sufficed. Please welcome Professor Renato.
Thank you, Don, Emily, and Devera for considering and accepting this nomination. I was nervous that if my letter was bad, I would screw up what should have been a can't miss. So the nomination, can't miss nomination. And I'm so glad to hear Don say that the choice was unanimous. So the faults of my documentation shall now remain undiscovered or inconsequential. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit more about my mentor, Milestones. But most of you probably already know much of the information available in books and on the interwebs, so I will weave in a few of those kinds of details. But mostly, I'm going to talk about the threads that intersect her creativity and her teaching. By the way, the photos you're seeing are my photos of her over the years at conferences where I teach in Michigan and from the amazing trip that a bunch of us took to China years ago. I started looking at graduate programs soon after finishing my BFA at Eastern Michigan University. By some alchemy of reputation and recommendation, I somehow landed on 5 schools to apply to, none in Michigan. Nothing wrong with schools in Michigan, but I'm from Michigan. And those in the Midwest were kind of maybes for me. I just wanted out. But I was serious about 2 programs. The first was in a big city, had a great reputation, was very technically oriented, which might have suited me just fine. But when I reached out to ask questions or see about going on a visit, I got a tepid response. Apply, and then if we accept you, you can drive out. The second was in a somewhat smaller city, but one where grunge was born. Near where Twin Peaks was shot, an emerald city surrounded by mountains. And when I contacted Mary at the University of Washington, the message was, I think you really should come visit, and I will only consider you for the teaching fellowship if I can interview you first. So I bought a ticket and flew to Seattle for the first time. It was intimidating. The long, well-designed studio had benches that each faced tall, semi-Gothic windows. Much of the undergraduate work was better than what I had been making. And then there was this woman who looked nothing like what I expected. Dressed in all black, sitting calmly in a swiveling chair in an office that seemed to be built of books. Skipping ahead a few decades, I recently reread the transcript of an oral history Mary did with the Smithsonian. There were so many interesting details about how she got started. The family log cabin, the one-room schoolhouse, the summer art classes in Kansas, the high school metals classes at the Cleveland Institute of Art, her preparatory work at Miami University of Ohio, that she was one of just 4 undergraduates working alongside and on the same projects as the master's students at Cranbrook. Then there was the serendipitous call she got from Cranbrook's Richard Thomas after she graduated, telling her that his former student, Brent Kington, was looking for a TA in the MFA program at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. She graduated with her master's at 24. In the same Smithsonian interview, the interviewer was struck that Mary knew what she was going to be from the time she was very young, and Mary replied, "Yeah, I find it odd that other people don't." While her youth seems to have been all about creative variety, her professional practice has been all about focus. If you have been lucky enough to see her exhibitions or retrospective catalog or artist lecture, I'm sure you were struck by how incremental and logical, how structured her experiments have been. She seems to assess, isolate the variables, and then recombine pretty much the same things in different quantities, in a different order, by mixing in new or reclaimed formal ideas from her previous work, over and over and over again. So much variety, so much progress, so unmistakably Mary's work. Mary's known for and makes mainly jewelry, but what really drove her wasn't the jewelry as jewelry. It was the material, in this case, the metal, the gold, the patterns, the shapes, the forms, the transitions. It was the process, the weaving, the forming, the joining, the refinement. But she never assumed or demanded that her students follow that same path or drive the same kind of vehicle. She had graduate students making teapots, but also beds and sculpture that would start motors when they detected you were coming. If you were excited about it, she had questions and comments, but was supportive. If you wanted to do something she didn't understand, she sent you to the library, to a colleague, or she encouraged you to reach out to someone outside of the school and maybe even the university. And then you met again and talked things through. You could do technical work, formal work, narrative work, work that seemed like it belonged in a whole other field, so long as it was yours, so long as you could defend it. I invited a few of Mary's other alum to share a few words about their experience. Michael Geik, over there, who finished his MFA with Mary and John Marshall in 2001, talked about how hard it was to find and understand graduate programs in the late 90s. He vividly remembers meeting her in her office, which was essentially a private library annex, as I've said, and listening to her talk about a book called Patterns That Connect. Talking to an art professor about what was essentially an anthropology book was a sign that there was something likely to be in this program that he wouldn't experience elsewhere. Our co-president, Seth Papik, who is from Seattle and who happened to be taking his undergrad at UW when Mike and I were there, commented that Mary's significant investment in researching the broad history and contemporary practices of body adornment and sharing that knowledge through her unforgettable History of Body Adornment course nurtured a generation of artists and educators who continue to cultivate the same appreciation of and curiosity in the depth and breadth of our field. Kirk Lang, who Mary brought to Seattle for grad school from the same part of Northern Ohio where she grew up, said that he was and still is in awe of her work. In particular, the ability to manipulate such a simple material, wire, into complex wearable objects that are not only beautiful, but are also somehow refined and gestural at the same time. Molly Epstein, who was one of the last two artists to graduate with an MFA in metal design from UW, seems to have benefited from the full fruition of Mary's goal for an education in our field, one which maybe transcends other creative disciplines and extends into things like science, something highly relevant to Molly's interests and thesis. She said that Mary made the connection that artists, especially jewelry artists, have a particular relationship with the body, one that is shared with surgeons and other medical professionals. We understand how metals interact with the body and can therefore apply our knowledge to the creation of wearable objects used in the medical field. It was without a doubt some of the most meaningful work I've done in my life. Started advancing these. Sorry, that's me. So back in the winter of back to the winter of '99, I found myself in an office in Seattle, sitting across from someone who'd known she was going to be an artist for her whole childhood, someone who was dedicated to the discipline of goldsmithing for her whole adult life. She shared books. We held up slides, some from people who are in this room, against the window to look at them. She talked about a colleague in sculpture who was electroforming with bone. I remember how excited she's throwing bone through an electrolyte, she would say. She was so excited about it. And I was too, it's great. Anyway, okay, sorry. She talked about the opportunity of an MFA education and the expectations. I still feel lucky and fortunate that she accepted me. So much of who I am connects to just those 2 years I spent with her. Don mentioned that words like mastery and master are sometimes used a little loosely, and I agree. Another graduate of SIU Carbondale, the late, great Phil Baldwin, happened to be on my thesis committee. And after our last crit, once the small group of them signed a warrant for graduation, Phil shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, Master Phil." I winced a little because Phil Baldwin was a master. Mary who is a master? I was just a bad student who buckled down at the last minute. But of course, Phil and Mary explained that mastery wasn't just some accumulation of knowledge or skill. It was a word we used in academia to mean that we might be ready to practice alongside more accomplished people. I think about it as master light. One of my favorite memories was when I was getting ready to fly off for a job interview in my second year. Mary tolerated my procrastination and allowed me to come over to her amazing home in West Seattle. West Seattle, that's what it is, right? Yeah. And allowed me to, sorry, and project slides onto the wall in her hallway. She helped me to reorganize them, give me a strategy for pairing what I was saying to what I was showing to what I was there at this interview to do. And she suggested that I don't do something that I'm doing right now. Mary sometimes talks about a poignant anecdote that happened while she was at Cranbrook. The students would bring all their almost exclusively hollowware projects out and put them on the table for critique. Mary slid a few extra pieces of jewelry in with her full complement of functional silver objects, and her teacher said, "Is that all?" In some ways, Mary's career stands as an extended answer to that question. A little girl who grew up drawing horses wound up creating some of the most dynamic and innovative, some of the most singular objects in gold ever made by an individual. As an academic from a field known for producing shiny baubles, Mary did a decade of research and then developed and taught one of the first courses in the history, and I would say sociology, of body adornment. This young woman who had already earned her Master of Fine Arts almost couldn't become a full member of SNAG. And she wound up as one of its first presidents, one of its greatest contributors and educators. And now she's the recipient of our most significant award. Mary, thank you for everything, and congratulations. We recognize and appreciate you.
Thanks, Doug. Well, I don't know what to say. Phil already told so many of the stories I was going to tell. So I remember when Phil first came, I was teaching the body adornment. He peeked in and he sat in for it a little bit. And when I interviewed him and all, he was just out of undergraduate school and he'd already written a novel, had it published. Well, thank you, Don and the committee and Phil, all of that, and to SNAG for this wonderful honor. It's a lifetime achievement honor. And when you think somebody tells you you're going to get a lifetime achievement honor, you start thinking, I guess I've lived a long time. And so I started thinking back and thinking how it all started. So I thought I'd just tell you some stories. I was one of those young people, as Phil said, that knew what you wanted to do. I wanted to be an artist, of course. What was art? Well, when I was 16, I went out to the Lawrence, Kansas Museum Art Camp for high school students, 6 different kinds of courses, and one of them was silversmithing with Carlisle Smith. Yeah, I made a bracelet. What I remember about that was that I didn't break a saw blade. But what I also remember is Carlisle, I wanted to bend the wire of that little hook at the end. I was having so much trouble. I can't hold it. And he just picked up 2 pliers. There are so many little things. Anyway, so I came home and I said, Ma, I want to be a metalsmith. What's a metalsmith? But I took some local courses. And then a few years later, I was lucky enough again. I had the support of my parents. So I was extremely lucky. I went out to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology in New York, and took a 6-week course with none other than Hans Christiansen. So we split our week between hollowware and jewelry. So after that, then I I wanted to go to Cranbrook, and that's a grad school. I was a baby, but they let me in, Bill said, one of just a few undergrads that they were taking in those days before it became only grad school. So working with Richard Thomas, it was a hollowware school. And if you wanted to do any jewelry, you did it at night or on the weekends, because he didn't think much of jewelry. It was hollowware. But after that, I went down to Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and studied with Brent Kington. And he did not give us any assignments, but we did have to take elective subjects, thank goodness. I took fibers. So after setting up the loom, near the end of the program, they wanted us to do an off-loom project. I chose macrame, which my defense, it was 1966. And macrame had not become the jute plant hangers that it came later. And I was doing my piece in thread, and the quarter was almost over. I thought, I could do it in wire and make a piece of jewelry and maybe get credit for both classes of the piece. So that was the first macrame piece. I gave it to Brent to see, and he thought, Mary, you got something there. I can't help you. I'm into blacksmithing, but you're going to have to push it on your own. So why don't you do a couple pair of earrings a week? So from Thanksgiving to next August, when I graduated, I did 2 pair of earrings a week to work out what I could do wire. And after little non-objective forms that I hung on my ears, I wanted to use that vocabulary to try to push further. When I taught myself how to draw, I was drawing things to try to make them look like things. That's my key to being able to draw better. So I started making little insects. They were long, thin, and delicate, so it was a wire translation. Made lizards, a bunch of them, they sold. And tried to do a number of other little sea creatures. It became my thesis project, and worked out well. So I stayed in Carbondale for another 2 years after graduating while my husband got his PhD in mathematics. And Brent, I worked in the School of Art. Brent let me keep a bench in the metal shop. So I kept pushing and kept trying to get a little better with the control of the wire. And I remember one day when Brent came back from being away a few days, and he said, oh, I was up in Chicago and I was meeting with a bunch of other metalsmiths, and we think we're going to start an organization. Well, that was that famous meeting where SNAG was talked about and started. I remember a number of years later talking to Kurt Motzdorf about how they got the idea of the name. It was a big controversy. Kurt wanted the whole idea to translate into the European languages, and Metalsmith didn't. So it wasn't the Society of North American Metalsmiths. It wouldn't be silversmith, that was one particular thing, coppersmith, blacksmith. He said goldsmiths are the ones that know everything. That's the epitome, the masters. And so it became the Society of North American Goldsmiths, and I thought to myself, SNAG, SNAG. Might not be the best name. I can just hear a lot of jokes, but I kept that to myself. I think probably was a good idea. Anyway, they organized a conference in Minneapolis in 1970, and I went. Wow, it was so much fun. I was meeting people, other students, other people that were professionals in the field. This was in the late 60s, 1970. We hardly had any visiting artists. And there were a few books, but very few, where we could see a few pictures in black and white. Maybe the cover was in color. But here I was seeing all these people. We all had our slides. And I was lucky to have been juried into the first exhibition with this piece. And applied. They opened up to see who wanted to become a member, and I applied, and they accepted me. You had to be juried in. And Fran said, "Do you bring any slides with you?" And I said, so it was wonderful. Well, we spent 2 years in Bellingham, Washington, where my husband taught at Western Washington, and then we took off for Taipei, where he had a visiting professorship in Taipei, in Taiwan. My husband was Chinese, you probably know from the last name, but so I made him a dragon. Well, in Taiwan, I was able to work because all I needed was a pair of pliers, a pair of wire cutters, my fingernails, and a little tiny torch to melt the ends on the balls. I wasn't doing any soldering. None of these things you see have any solder in them. They're just tied together. Made a phoenix. He can have a dragon. I can have a phoenix. I'm the empress, you know. Anyway, came back into the US in 73. I was there from 71 to 73. Came back, and so I missed the 72 conference in New York. They had one every other year. But I did get to the one in Washington, D.C. in 1974. And since then, I think I've missed 8 because of scheduling conflicts. So I come a lot to SNAG, I suppose. So in 1975, a few slides to catch up here. In 1975, there wasn't really a conference. Heikki Seppa invited us, anyone who wanted to come, to Bromwoods, which is a conference center outside of St. Louis, to talk about what we're going to do with this organization. Had a conference every other year, but people wanted more. So we said, I volunteered to be the secretary. I'd take the notes of the meeting, and we were talking about a newsletter, and Mark Baldridge volunteered to do it. Thank you, Mark. He's an unsung hero. He should be well acknowledged, I think. He started putting it together right after the conference. So the Society of North American Goldsmiths newsletter started in late summer, and by the next early 76, it became Gold Dust. And every time it came, I devoured it. I couldn't. Bios of people, exhibition opportunities, new books that were published, tech tips, and everything we do at SNAG, but just in this little newsletter. Let's see. So in the evenings there at Bromwoods, we'd show each other our slides informally. And it wasn't long after that Bob Immendorf and Kurt Monsdorf invited me to do a workshop at New Paltz. Impressed with myself. So I said, hey, yeah, because I'd come back into the country in 73. I'd lost my husband in Taiwan. I was a widow. I didn't know who I was. I was trying to reestablish an identity and a community. I just knew it had to have something to do with metals. And so I'd found SNAG. I'd started making a new family from the people I met in SNAG. And I was, trying to get myself back into the field. Well, soon after that workshop, Bob Immendorf came up to me and he said, we'd like you to be vice president of SNAG. Little me? I mean, I've just out of school for a few years. This is a wonderful organ. You want me to help? He said, yes, we do. So I wasn't elected. I think I was appointed vice president of SNAG. And then in 1976, well, in 1977, well, I'll go back. So when they formed SNAG, Brent became the first president. And then he wanted, after a few years, he wanted to go off and start a BANA and the blacksmithing. So Bob Immendorf took over as president. Well, now the next year, 77, Bob Immendorf got a sabbatical from New Paltz, and he wanted to sort of take some time off to do some work. So I was vice president. I guess I'm president. Well, that's enough to straighten your spine. So I was suddenly president, and the next year I was up for re-election to my own 2-year term. So I was president from 77 to 80. And in those days, we board members and officers planned the conferences. Have an executive director, and we didn't have any conference programmers. We did it. I remember in 79, George McLean was our man in Boston. And so he would run around, and he was deciding what hotel, he was deciding what big companies in Providence we'd take a bus trip to. He was even eating all of the box lunches, and we'd decide on the telephone which one we were going to go with. So one time I remember that a lot of us were gathered around. So SNAG in those days was really growing, and it was growing from 350 to 700 and over to 1,000. Gold Dust became Goldsmith Journal the next year in 77. And then in 1980, it became Metalsmith. And so I have these issues that I took a picture of as extras in my library, and I have brought them along with me today. So after this is over and we go to the reception, if anyone would like real physical hard copies of some of the old, and look at some of the old SNAG, if you make a significant donation to SNAG, I will give them to you. So there was one time, and I can't remember which conference, we were all gathered around a table at a restaurant. A long table, would probably put several around, maybe a bunch of us. We were having so much fun. And Marianne Shear was there wearing her body monitoring necklace. And so she'd put little things on her skin under her shirt that will monitor your heartbeat. And then she was wearing the necklace, and the liquid crystal display there had that orange circle that would so go in and out. We said, come on, that's not really your heart, is it? And so Phil Fight got up from the other side of the table, and he ran around, leaned over behind Marianne and nuzzled her on the back of the neck. And so everyone just broke up. I'm not sure he can get away with doing that these days. So the 1980 conference in Tucson was one that really is memorable for me. We went and visited a huge open pit copper mine, and had the normal wonderful lectures and all. And in the evening, the hotel had a hot tub out back, and we were in the hot tub. I mean, it was a big one. A lot of people were in the hot tub every night, having a lot of fun. And I remember that Jim Cotter was taking pictures, and he did get me in a bathing suit with my hair down almost to my ankles. My hair, I haven't cut it since high school. So it was, yeah. He kept saying he was gonna blackmail me with that one. But luckily he lost it. But there was a wonderful copper exhibition there. We didn't have the gallery crawl, but we had this one major exhibition. And I don't know about you guys, but when I saw such good work, I couldn't wait to get back into the studio and get back to work. It just energized me and gave me so many ideas. So in 1970, I started working in gold, switched from silver. I had wanted to work in gold, but gold's expensive and I was scared. The things that I loved, the torques that I'd been making, were based on the Scythian gold and Irish gold torques. And so finally in 85, I got up the courage and took a deep breath and ordered 10 ounces. It was $400 an ounce then. And made this neck piece. And I loved it so much, I've never gone back. I just love working in gold. One time we were in a board meeting, gathered around a table. Again, I can't remember what year it was. And everybody started talking about dyslexia. And then we started giving stories about how awful high school was with our dyslexia, how difficult it was. And it came around to me, and I said, well, you know, I don't think I'm that dyslexic. I just can't tell my left from my right. And I think maybe that's why so much of my work was symmetrical for so many years. But, you know, I thought, I don't know, if you're like me, you carry a loop with you. And if somebody shows you something, you really want to see it. My students hated that. I get the loop out and, oh, look at that. Close at my solder seams. But as they say, those are 30 gauge, 22 karat wires that I twine. Anyway, working with our hands has been our salvation. It gave us our careers. It gave us feeling of we could accomplish something. And so with my career, looking back on it, I've met so many wonderful people, and the organizations I've been involved with, whether it be SNAG, ACC, the UMA Symposium, old Somerville, which was wonderful. I had this chosen family. It's been I've been very lucky in my life to have had that. And I'll read this last part because I sort of want to get it right. I have tried to make objects that leave some beauty in the world. Changes. And through volunteering for many organizations and in my teaching, I hope that I have been able to help others find a similarly rewarding and satisfying life. So I want you to know that I am deeply, deeply appreciative of this award from SNAG because it's coming from SNAG, my favorite people.